Couple of housekeeping things then. I've just started the recording for those who are on the call with us. I've also got the chat window open. So if people have questions or you want to interject while Sawan and I are talking, feel free to just drop questions or what have you in the chat and we'll react to those as we go. None of that will be recorded or included when it becomes its final form. It'll just mean that we can direct the conversation towards what you guys are interested in. This really was just an idea that Sawan had to get together. We've done a few things before, podcast episodes and YouTube videos and things like that. We thought it'd been a while since we did one, so we'll do another one. We're going to talk just on a range of topics. It is being recorded, but that doesn't mean you should panic and not get involved. Do feel free to interject questions throughout. And before we go, shall we do some introductions, Sawan, to be professional for those who haven't come across us before? Do you want to go first, Sawan? Who on earth are you? What do you do?
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Holly. Thanks for getting together again, and really great to say hi to everybody who's joined us. So I'm Sawan. I started my career in information security many years ago and have evolved as information security has progressed. I call myself a privacy advocate these days because when I'm talking business narrative, which is some of the biggest influence I get to bring into business buy-in, I find that talking the language of privacy and why it matters to us is what helps us get security. So what I'm saying is privacy is often why we need security controls in the first place, whether that's regulatory compliance or anything else. Business strategy comes from that. Often it feeds into that. So I call myself a privacy advocate these days, although I've led information security transformation projects for charities, management consultants, London Luton Airport. So when me and Holly first got together to talk cybersecurity stuff and a chat, multi-SaaS companies, fintech. And I'm currently working with a company called Servest, who are doing something absolutely unique. The time for climate intelligence is here, and we've created one of the first climate risk assessment platforms that helps people be more responsible when making decisions about physical assets and the future around the world. But all in all, information security, it's really about getting to know what matters most to an organization and tailoring it. And that's what I do. And I find vendor risk management being such a big thing that's continuously evolving. But we'll talk about it in a different way today. Holly, your turn.
I want to pull up on the job title thing as well. I think after I'll do an introduction and then we should talk about it. I'm always interested with cybersecurity professionals, why they choose the job title that they do. And I think it's interesting that you prefer privacy advocate. We should talk a little bit about that. I think it might be a nice segue between the supplier risk management stuff we want to talk about and also the career side of things that we want to mention as well. Because no doubt when people are looking at of course there's we always talk about how people can break into the industry, but there's the other side as well, isn't it? Maybe you've been in the industry a few years. How do you develop that career and get to those more senior positions? And why do some people like yourself and I avoid some job titles? And what does that mean? So that's something we should leave in the notes to come back to as we get talking. But before I go too far, my name's Holly Grace-Williams. I'm a cybersecurity tester. I've worked for a range of companies doing penetration testing. Been in cybersecurity for quite a while now, about 16 years. I started on the defensive side doing network security engineering, but for the last, since about 2011, something like that, I've been working almost purely on penetration testing. People have no doubt seen me talk before or seen that I've given lots of talks. I do like the public speaking thing very often because I like to kind of shine the other side of things. Very often people can get quite enclosed in their view of things. So if they're an auditor, they'll think about everything in terms of compliance frameworks. If they're a pen tester, they'll think of everything in terms of exploits and those kinds of things. And I like to try and link things together. So hopefully I'll pull that off today. But if people are wondering kind of what my background is and how I get here, I just hack things, even though I've been doing it for a long time and I've run teams and run companies and things like that. I still do spend a huge amount of my time either hacking things or doing research to enable future hacking of things. So pen tester or cybersecurity tester is the core of my job. Right, Sawan, is there anywhere particular that you wanted to get started with? I don't want to derail you if you've got a little plan.
No, let's do what you said. Let's jump into the job title thing, because I noticed you also introduced yourself as a security tester.
Yes.
And interestingly, I would say that they're both very modest, privacy advocate and security tester. Yet, we care very much about our careers. We always have. We go the extra mile and get a badge, a certification that validates whatever we're working on, whatever we're learning, we think is important. And we really take a lot of pride in our work. We both know we've worked together. We've done lots of collaborations, and we have taken, we go the extra mile. The detail is really something. And I definitely like to shout out about the successes when we deliver them. And I feel good right now because we're doing really well with the current startup I've been working with, who's now scaling. And I think, you know, all of these things would make one think that, isn't job titles really, really important? Well, of course they are. Absolutely they are, because they often help with the, to communicate at the level you need to within an organization. But in reality, as our industry is evolving and the economy changes and everything like that, the message is really clear, isn't it? You know, and what is it that you do? And privacy advocacy in everybody's life, for me, is really important for people to realize the risks and how important it is and how they should take it. Because it's not even important to you, but it's really important for someone else to breach. You shouldn't just give it away. That's my approach to privacy. Tell us about you.
Yeah, I think that the job title thing is really interesting because how I introduce myself in different fields is often quite different. So if anyone's ever spoken to me professionally, if anyone's ever engaged with my company, I never professionally use the term ethical hacker. I can get into why that is, but there's a lot of troublesome issues with that title. But then if I'm talking to the media, I will use that term because I'm not talking to somebody who's working in our industry who's maybe strongly technically competent. I'm probably talking to the general public. And I think this is interesting when it comes out to, you use the term, what is it that you do? And I feel very often that we do lots of different things. Throughout our career, our actual responsibilities will change. But when I'm giving presentations and things like that, very often when I'm thinking about my, like what title am I going to give, my actual job title, the title that's kind of on my employment contract, I'm the managing director. And I've been MD for a few years now for a couple of companies. But it's not how I introduce myself, because usually when I'm giving these presentations, I'm trying to either explain my viewpoint or explain my bias. And very often when I do these talks, especially if I'm with someone else like yourself, Sawan, I will be bringing in the offensive security sides of things. I will be bringing in the hacker mindset side of things and those kinds of things. So introducing myself as a pen tester or a cybersecurity tester or something like that kind of enables people very quickly to realize my background and bias. Whereas if I say a company director or something like that, it doesn't help at all. And, you know, I would introduce myself very differently if I was going for a job interview or something like that, you know, and then that's when you start worrying about things like, can you stick senior on the beginning? Can you stick team leader on the beginning? Can you stick manager on the end and those kinds of things? And you're trying to position yourself in terms of seniority within an organization. But for a talk like this, those things aren't necessarily important. I do think it's funny that both of us have taken quite baseline titles with your preference for privacy advocate and mine just like, oh, just a tester. But I do think that's something that people need to think about throughout their careers, is like how you refer to yourself is important, because it will be a big part of the person you are speaking to's first impression. You know, whether you're working, you know, whether you're going for a job interview or whether you're working as a consultant and you're trying to explain something to another team. I liked the fact that you mentioned talking privacy in terms of trying to explain to business risk and those kinds of things. That's not something I've done before, but I like the fact that I think if you're trying to explain a risk to an organization, you're doing it in terms of privacy. That person could likely interpret that both in terms of the organizational side of things, but privacy impacts us as individuals as well. And I think that could maybe broaden their view in terms of like, oh yeah, this affects the company, but also how would I feel about this as an individual? One of the things that I very often hear companies, in fact, only last week I was talking to a company and they said, we're talking about performing a pen test for them. And one of the things I want to work out is, before I start a pen test, before I start hacking a company, what is the worst thing that could happen during a pen test? And what I mean is, what is the risk that scares you so I can try and demonstrate it? And very often companies downplay the privacy risk and they'll say things like, oh, we don't hold any PII, we only hold employee information. And it's like, but that's still PII, and that would still be really bad for the organization if it just stole all of, you know, be it payroll and salary information, or be it things like personal addresses and things. But people often, oh, because it's our staff, it's less valuable. And I always think that's really funny.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It's incredibly valuable. And in terms of fines, you know, this is still the same. You still feel the same impact if you don't take organizational measures to protect that. You know, think about identity being still such a huge attack vector. And when we come down to risk management questions from people we want to do business with, people who need to know
Oh,
what our posture is. We find that they want to know everything now. They want to know what your BYOD customers are using, people are using. They want to know what
yeah.
devices they're using. Do you have any Huawei devices owned by any of your employees that are allowed to connect to corporate data? That's there. And I see those kind of questions. And there's no doubt TikTok's going to be all over this now as well. People are going to be asking, are you allowing people to use social media apps that, such as TikTok? Of course it is. Look at what the BBC have done this week, and other organizations are advising people not to use it. That stuff, very subjective. But the reality is, we have to align to what we want to do. And for me, bringing privacy into organizational conversations, I think about, what does the business want to do? What affects them? Who do they want to work with? And making that part easy. So when we think about vendor risk management, I think that, the questionnaires come and they keep coming, and they come in different forms. And sometimes it's a spreadsheet. Sometimes it's a SaaS platform that they're using. Sometimes it's simplified by saying, if you have ISO 27001 or Cyber Essentials Plus SOC 2 report, then you can skip most of this and answer 3 questions and provide evidence of that. Doing penetration testing specifically, just provide all the artifacts and no questions answered. Sometimes you don't have any of those, and you're going to have to answer about 100 questions. And that's where it becomes a problem, because you're answering so much that is yes, no, yes, we do. And when you think about exposure, what's your exposure to an organization? Every organization has risks, and you sometimes live with them. An organization lives with them, it keeps them, accepts them. And if you look at any organization's risk register, you'll find there'll probably be a few. But if you ask for a screenshot, if a potential customer asks for a screenshot of your risk register and there's 10 risks there, well, that looks bad, but you're not getting an opportunity to tell the story, right?
Yeah.
So the story is that they're all accepted and they're fine. We live those because our exposure doesn't actually, our exposure doesn't take into account that these are problems to us.
Yeah.
It's a lot of information security pros will focus on the CVSS, the severity ratings of a risk. And they're high, we've got to do them all. But do they matter, all of them? This is the question, right? So, this whole thing, in my view, actually looks like a security bundle, a very quick security bundle. However that looks, and however you quickly release that to potential business partners, investors, customers, is key. And to simplify it is what's going to help everyone continuously turn around business deals and build a level of trust for the later on supplier audit that we've got to maintain and continue.
Yeah, I'm going to have to take some notes here, because you're bringing up so many important details that I want to talk about. So there's like 3 different things I want to follow up from that one. But the first one, you mentioned supplier questionnaires, and you mentioned this ideal that I've never actually come across, which is where on the supplier security questionnaire, it can be a SaaS platform. That's so rare. They're always Excel spreadsheets in my experience. And this idea that you could tick one box, such as we have ISO 27000 or we have Cyber Essentials, and then you could skip questions. Again, essentially have never come across that. Usually what happens is an Excel spreadsheet that is more than 100 questions. And there's a couple of things that frustrate me about those questionnaires, but the big one, certainly for us in the kind of services that we deliver as a cybersecurity consultancy, is where just huge portions of it are just not relevant. The most extreme example I've got for this is a customer who wanted from us what was essentially an off-the-shelf training course, right? We deliver a few training courses, but for the sake of keeping it simple for this discussion, you could imagine, like, please deliver for us a security awareness training course, or please deliver for us a secure development lifecycle training course, something like that. For us, that is a course that we have developed. So there's no customization or bespoke content in this case. They're just saying, hey, that course that you've got, please deliver it for us. And from my actual, say it's me who's delivering it on the team, my actual delivery would be, all I need is a point of contact on the day. So when I get to your company's reception, I can say, I am here to see John. And then John will take me through to the meeting room and I'll deliver my course, and then we'll leave. The company might share some information. So they might share things like, if we're doing a software development security course, they might share some information about their tech stack and things like that. But generally speaking, the required information to deliver that is minimal. We're not integrating systems together. They're not accessing any of our systems. We're not really accessing any of their data. There might be some data in terms of point of contacts and things like that, but very, very little. But most of the time when we do this, we get onboarded onto their supplier list and we have to go through the full process. And generally the justification for that is, oh, we might buy something else from you in the future. And it's like, that's fine. And that's sensible, because you're absolutely right. This one might be a training course, but the next one might be a pen test where we really are getting much deeper into your data. But could you not just have some flag in the future that says these guys are approved for training, and if we ever do buy something else from them, we should go deeper then? Because I'm like 141 questions into an Excel spreadsheet going, not relevant, not relevant, not relevant, not relevant. And it's very, very frustrating. So I was going to ask you, you're like, how do you simplify and optimize the process for supplier spreadsheets? Or is it just that your preference is a SaaS platform where you can skip sections? Or do you have some more magic?
Well, often even with the spreadsheets, you have that question, right? So you can skip these first two tabs because of that reason. No doubt, when you are particularly, and this does apply a lot to, this point is very much about SaaS. It relates to SaaS companies, but it relates to everyone. So when I say a lot of SaaS companies right now coming out of the wood, they're just being developed left, right, and center. There's a lot of them, right? And then every organization is using so many SaaS products, SaaSification as we call it. Now, if you're selling a service, there's no doubt about it, you probably want to do business with somebody whose organization is more mature than yours. Enterprise readiness, right? Get into the enterprise, which means they're going to have governance and risk and compliance teams. They're going to have a function set up. They're going to have a procurement team. Some organizations certify that procurement team, which will have pass-fail questions. When I was working for the airport, we had pass-fail questions. We couldn't work with somebody, even if they were the perfect partner, if they didn't have a certain level of insurance. So, these things are there, and you have that to go through, and then you also have the necessity to remain on an approved vendors list. Then you think, so what is the perfect balance that anybody who wants to do business with other businesses can align to, and therefore, maintain it and always be ready for all of those enterprises. The thing is, you don't want to go out and certify your company in everything. You want to align to a 360-degree posture that's a shared information gathering framework assessment that is the one that most supply chain risk assessment questions come from. And that's fed into, they call it the SIG, that is fed into by over 50 global regulations. You want to align to that and build one. An organization should align to that and build one so that they're covering 360-degree security, availability, privacy, all sorts of questions that strengthen up their posture. Then you pick a couple of things for independent validation. And to me, there's only three that are the most important. And it's not dropping a framework name right now. It's not, no, it may not be ISO 27001 to some, could be SOC 2, depends on where in the world you are. But it is, what does your customers want? What are they aligned to? That's really important to align to. And then pick a balance, one that is focused on cybersecurity baseline controls, another one that focuses on management. That gives you top level and bottom level alignment. And lastly, validation. Whatever you're doing means nothing if you are not security assessing your organization. So you cannot prove that you're absolutely secure if you have not done that independent validation. And as much as you need an internal vulnerability security assessment program, some ongoing continuous assessment, you have to have third-party independent specialists who do this for you. And that's how you and I have done business a lot, because I always managed to bring in this partnership so that we can prove that we can be trusted as an organization. It's been validated by a 360-degree assessment across whatever we're doing in this company, previous company, whatever, right? So it's about a balance. And then most important point is this, having all those things and being able to deliver it within 2 or 3 clicks. So how do you deliver it? Sometimes you have to fill up forms that the person you want to do business with, the business you want to do business with has provided to you. But you can also often respond by saying, well, look, here's our security statement. There's links to our cyber insurance on there. There's links to our ISO certificates. There's links to our Cyber Essentials certificate. And there's a button you could click after you run through an automated NDA. You can get a copy of our penetration testing attestation letter. Bring in these workflows. You can support commercial teams turning out business proposals all the time really quickly. And that
sounds like a big part of that is quite a lot of automation then, because I'm getting the impression that you're saying, click a link, go through an automated NDA, and then you can get that information. Is that one of the ways to simplify this process, is just take the humans out of it wherever possible?
Absolutely. I'm actually seeing a number of SaaS apps coming out recently that are saying, run through an assessment with us, provide all your validations to us, and we will then be your badge. And let's just say that badge is the ultimate badge, right? It's called the ultimate security badge, and it's a badge that is being commercialized as a SaaS service to validate your security, so you can just send them to our site. But the truth is, these have no real validations because it beats the objective of having a certificate in the first place of something like ISO, right? So I'm not really a supporter of all of these. That's an evolving area, and I think there's a big marketing angle to that we have to be careful of, because if you go through a big 3-week assessment to prove something like, I think there's one called CyberGX, you may find KPMG, who you want to work with, still want something else. So the key thing is sticking around things like ISO and turning it all around. Automation, yes. Answering your question, automation, absolutely. To more automate that workflow and those responses out really quickly is really key.
One of the things I often talk to companies about isn't actually automation, but I can see that it links into it very strongly. And that is, when you create the information, the privacy or data security related information, it's like at that point, have an internal discussion around its confidentiality. Don't just mark everything as internal only, because there can be advantages to this. So for example, where companies have things like an internal vulnerability management program, and they're paying for someone like us to come in and do a pen test as a third party, independent validation. I am of the opinion that you should share that information with us, because there's a huge amount of additional context we can give. So one thing, if there's vulnerabilities that you know about, you don't want me wasting time writing reports up and writing the details of these vulnerabilities up if you're already aware of them. There's no point in that. It's nice to have them validated and for a third party to say, yep, that's there, and those kinds of things. But another thing would be, maybe you have vulnerabilities that you've graded internally, or maybe you've taken them from something like a vulnerability scanner and just trusted wholeheartedly that vulnerability scanner's grading as being accurate. And a human pen tester coming in could regrade that vulnerability because maybe there's some additional context there. So maybe you've got something like, to give an example, SMB signing not being enforced, a tool like Nessus would grade that as a medium. Very often we can raise that risk through interception attacks. If there's got something like that, that's value that a pen tester can bring in very, very quickly. Can say, I can see that you found this vulnerability previously, you've graded it as this, and I disagree with this grading, and here's all of this additional context. But very often when we work with companies who have internal vulnerability scanning or internal vulnerability management, they can't share that information with us. They think they probably could, but they've never sat down and had that discussion over whether that information could be shared. So I really liked the idea that you had there of like having an automated process where you can sign an NDA and then that attestation can be disclosed. And I think more of that should happen, not necessarily the automation, but just like that internal discussion of this information can be shared with these things. As you're mentioning about things like taking a screenshot of the risk register and those kinds of things, I assume there's certain times in the risk register can or cannot be shared, or only certain parts of it can be. Policies, very often internal policies can or cannot be shared. Yeah, it's ridiculous how often sharing more information with the pen tester will either lead to better, more contextful results, or it might even just save time. And if you're paying for a consultant, that's probably a good thing because it's going to be less costly. But yeah, if you already know about a bunch of vulnerabilities, there's no point me spending time on them, assuming that they're correctly graded and accurate and those kinds of things. But I rarely see companies geared up for good external information sharing, even with their suppliers.
This is why I'm really a big fan of internal adversary security assessments, because to start off with, if you don't share information related to vulnerabilities when you're looking to partner with someone to do a security assessment, a lot of time can get wasted with trying to penetration test. That's consultancy time, and it doesn't help. But then, ultimately, this is should be overruled by a NDA in the first place anyway. You pick a security partner that you know, you trust, you work with, you build good rapport with if you've met them for the first time. All of that is essential with doing anything. If I go out and start an audit, for example, with Cyber Essentials Plus, first thing I want to do is meet a few people, build a new partnership, build a strong partnership, or bring in a repeat partnership. So knowing that we're going to be in this business partnership together, we're going to win and do this and build that form of rapport. Now, the thing about what exists and what doesn't exist and what you can share, I mean, it's tricky because there's two sides to this. If you're trying to do business with if you want to bring in a supplier, then you're in more power about what to share, what not to share. And it's your own disadvantage if you don't tell that supplier if they're a security partner about things, because then it just wastes time. But in reality, you don't have to share much. You're the one asking them what they have, what they don't have. Can you trust them? Can they join your supply chain? Can they become a trusted vendor? But if you're the one who wants to do business with somebody else, and you're telling them that, they're asking to see our risk register, and you're telling your internal commercial teams you want to see our risk register, and we're not going to do that. We can't do that. It's confidential. You could block a deal. And block a deal has a big impact on the reputation and brand of the information security team, department, leader, pen tester, whatever we are in our organization. The brand is one of the things we're going to talk about, which is highly affected if you're a blocker, if security becomes a blocker.
Oh, wonderful question from the audience here. Where do you both stand on sharing things like company policies, e.g. password policy, acceptable use policy, etc., as well as risk registers and such with customers when asked for in their cybersecurity questionnaires? I will jump in first if that's okay.
Sure.
My opinion is very, very simple. When companies generate that information, they should look to share it immediately. That doesn't mean that they should share everything, but it means that you internally should have that discussion for should this be shared. And there's a couple of things to bear in mind with that. But the first is Kirchhoff's principle, right? So this is something that comes from cryptology. And the idea is that, the original idea was that the system should be secure even if an attacker has information about that system. So specifically, the original principle was, for example, even if an attacker knows what cryptographic algorithm you're using, that algorithm should still be secured, just even if the attacker knows which one you've chosen. And I would broadly apply that to quite a lot of information security, to be honest. If your password policy gets disclosed, that should not cause your organization any risk. And if it does, it's probably a bad password policy. There might be some things that you choose to hold back. The most frequent thing that I see organization holding back is incident response policies and business continuity policies, those kinds of things, and all of the planning documentation that goes along with that. That's fine. I can certainly understand that. When you're operating under duress, you might want to keep more of that information secret. But yeah, password policies, acceptable use policies, those kinds of things, they should not contain confidential information as a general rule. And generally, they should be shareable. They should not contain confidential information. And I would be very strong for sharing those with suppliers through cybersecurity questionnaires, those kinds of things, but also things like pen testers, because your password policy probably has the policy behind the technical enforcement that you have on your network. And if it's a bad policy, I can very quickly guide you on why it's bad and how you can tighten that up. So yeah, I am a information sharing positive person, but what about you, Sawan?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I would add to say that these things are happening now. I've had some this week, I've had some last week. These requests are out there and they do come. And we touch password for a second. It's the easiest one. Well, if we think about this security model, the zero trust model, right? Continue to verify, zero trust model, continue to verify. You take that. Well, if this is the case, we've got to assume that, a hacker is always going to assume that you've got certain things in place in the first place. And they're going to assume that you've probably got a whole strong, password policy. So let's just think about that and just assume that, well, we have our right controls in place like MFA, blocked locations, blocked IP, a computer without certain patching is not allowed to connect, all that type of stuff, then it really doesn't matter. Like you say, password policy, let it go out there and let them assume that we've got the best password policy in the world, because it's going to be part of that whole assumption scenario. Now, as far as acceptable use policies and other policies, well, policies are high level and they aren't procedural. So the procedures that go with those policies are the more sensitive ones to be concerned about, from my view. But again, it's an internal collaboration. And if the business deal is of a scope that is worth the share, then some of this narrative inside this policies may need revising if it's the case, if it's too confidential, but collaborate with your general counsel and your finance partners and build a good, this is what the committee internal should be about, to just make sure that people are aware that this is what's being asked and this is why we're doing it and it's worth this much, so that the buck doesn't, and the eyes don't land on just the security team that you shared this, right? We all agree to share it. We all know we're sharing it. It's worth it. Last thing about risk registers. Yeah, risk registers is a recent evolution, I find. And it's unfortunate because it paints a picture of color, reds, greens, and ambers. And when you ask if somebody asks me to share a risk register, the first thing I'm going to do is give them the high level imaging.
Yeah.
They just see that, and then a narrative to go with it to say that our risks are managed, treated, and accepted, and anything is remediated, addressed very quickly. We have no current concerns from external or internal factors, etc. Something like that, would always be go along with that. And if they want to go follow up and say, I would like to see the internal risks and see what they actually all are, because they could. Again, it's about collaboration internally, potentially putting together a narrative to go with each one that's high level and explains that this is actually all right with us, for us, because of this reason.
I can give an example as well of where like sharing information could be interpreted to be a bad thing, but actually when you think of the whole system, it's not. And this was recently doing a target breach assessment for an organization. Target breach assessment, the way that I'm using that term is like a baby red team, right? A full red team engagement to me is where you're doing technical, physical, and social attacks. So I'm sending phishing emails to your staff, I'm trying to break into your buildings, and I'm doing technical attacks. If you scope restrict that just to technical attacks, like I can hack anything I want, but I can only hack, I can't do social or physical. Call it targeted breach. So I was doing a targeted breach assessment for an organization recently, and as part of that assessment, one of the things that I did, of course, I'm not just hacking them from our office Wi-Fi here with its fixed IP address. So one of the things we do is we spin resources up in the cloud, and we launch our attacks from cloud platforms. That allows us to move around quite quickly. It allows us to not have to worry about being tracked through things like known IP addresses. Just by chance, because I was hosting some of our infrastructure for this target breach in AWS, I spun up one of the instances to perform this attack from Ireland. That's one of the major regions that AWS uses. And when performing a certain, if I remember correctly, it was something like I thought I had credentials for the Citrix environment, so I just wanted to test them. I went to connect to the Citrix environment with these credentials that I thought might work, and I got blocked because one of the things that they had configured was region blocking. So you had to be in the UK to do that. And I offhandedly mentioned that was annoying, and if I'd known that, I would have saved myself 30 minutes spinning up this infrastructure, launching that attack. Because of course, from the attacker's point of view, as soon as it says, connection coming from a blocked region, I just go, oh, it's probably UK only. Spun down that infrastructure, spun up the same box, but this time in the UK, connected and continued my attack. And the customer countered that. No, it's a good thing that you didn't know, because that illegitimate connection from Ireland is a detectable event. It is effectively an IOC, and then their SOC can respond to that. If they had shared that information that they were region blocking, they would have missed that IOC and maybe would have been a little bit slower to respond. So there is a counter narrative there that the more information you share with the attacker, the easier it is for them. But again, Kirchhoff's principle, even if I know you are using region blocking, your systems should still be secure. You shouldn't be just relying on region blocking. There should be a whole bunch of other protections like MFA and those kinds of things as well. So there is a counter argument, and it is that it may make it easier for the attacker if they know things like your password policy, if they know things like the fact that you're using region blocking. But the system should be built in such a way that even with that knowledge, it is still secure. So that's just a recent example.
That's interesting. And it also reminds me of how important it is to build into the scope of these kind of assessment programs, opportunities like that. So if it's an internal decision to not disclose something, and it turns out to be a positive like this, then it becomes an opportunity to advertise the security brand internally. Say, look, this was blocked. It's like an incident response exercise. And how you narrate that shows brand trust internally, and then also how you write that up and share that with an external party who wants to know how your security assessments are, how your internal BCP-DR, incident response procedures are tested.
Yeah.
Have you tested them in the past 12 months? All of this is useful stuff and can be used.
Yeah. You mentioned attestation letters earlier as well, and this is something actually not a lot of customers ask for them, but we do put them together occasionally. And very often customers have quite a specific idea of what they want, and usually it's, as you can imagine, to share as little information as possible. And very often they want us to say things like there was 2 highs, 1 medium, 3 low, and little else. Or actually one of the things that I want to talk about as a tester is, what was the scope of the engagement and what methodology was used? Because there's a distinction, in my opinion, and it's an important one between this company's external validation, their third-party testing is a vulnerability scan versus we're doing red teaming for you, you know. And if you're much further down that line towards, you know, either having pen testing or targeted breach or red teaming engagements, that's a good thing because it shows a high level of maturity. So you should be including that in maybe things like the attestation letter, as you mentioned, just those communications that you have around, you know, how are you making those security wins as an organization? And if you're mature enough to be doing stuff right of pen testing, you should be talking about that. And I don't think you should be hiding that. So yeah, not only would I say you should, where possible, be transparent about things like password policies, risk registers, those kinds of things. Even like, what are you testing and how are you testing it? You know, that's an important thing.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And the attestation letter point is interesting because a lot of people, a lot of organizations just happily just share the penetration testing report with all of its results.
Yeah.
When they're asked, have you done it? They'll just share the report. That's crazy. I think that if we apply the need to know principle, which is embedded in all of our work, you give only what you need to give. Someone's asking if you're doing penetration testing. Okay, there could be some sub-questions to that, and if so, what are your results, etc. The attestation letter is the first step towards need to know. It's much more common with companies that are selling a technology product because they want to just show something that's really based on that only. Oh, could be the case where they know they've got a lot of things still in progress and they've got to give something a bit minimal. But attestation letters, I think now, after our conversation today, could do with a bit of evolution. Yeah. When I ask for an attestation letter, I kind of know what I want in it, but I think that articulating the methodology and security testing approach is a great top paragraph to the whole thing. These things can only do better for one's brand, internally, externally, and help people do business together safely.
Yeah, it's also like sometimes in attestation letters, I try and guide customers in terms of like how you talk about retesting and things, because you could just put it in terms of pen test was done, things are found, a retest was performed, and hopefully that comes back as everything was addressed. But there's also like a distinction there is like, did you fix the specific vulnerability? So something tricky like cross-site scripting, for example. Did you fix that instance of cross-site scripting, or did you take that as a learning point to implement better protections against cross-site scripting? Be that pushing back into your software development lifecycle or looking at system hardening techniques like content security policy or those kinds of things. Also, like, how were those fixes applied? So one of the things that quite often happens, if people don't know, when we do pen tests, we have a vulnerability management platform. We can share results with customers through a SaaS platform that we have, which means as soon as I find a vulnerability, I can tell the technical team about it, which means it's not uncommon now for us, for customers to fix vulnerabilities before we get to the end of the engagement, or immediately following the engagement if they've done a change freeze for it. They'll push the fix to production. And again, that's another interesting thing. It's like, okay, a critical vulnerability was found. How long after that detection point did it take you to fix it? Because I would say there's a strong difference between fixed within 12 hours of the end of the test and it took us 12 months to get around to this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that's an incredible one. That mean time to remediate, MTTR, acronym, to be able to say in a narrative that as attested to by the security assessor that 5 of the vulnerabilities were addressed within the window of the testing week is incredible. That's incredible. Again, it's an opportunity for internal teams to be able to broadcast how efficient their security program is and how it affects the bottom line.
Yeah. Just on another thing on that, companies not wanting to share info on disaster recovery and incident response policies. I understand the theory of it, but in my experience, I make the assumption, this is conjecture, that most companies don't want to share their IR and business continuity plans because they are bad. Very often, as a pen tester, the only time that I really get involved with business continuity and incident response plans are when we're doing tabletop exercises with customers. So we do incident response scenario testing where we'll sit down or walk through a scenario with a company to allow them to flex that muscle memory of their incident response plan and also start looking towards developing playbooks and things like that. And very often during that process, we find those plans aren't great. So maybe this is me being cynical, but maybe it is the fact that a lot of companies don't want to share those documents because they're hard to write good ones, and it might make you look bad if you have a bad IR or DR plan. So yeah, there's two sides to that. There's the not wanting to share too much information because if you're dealing with a breach, the attacker knowing how you will deal with it is possibly a bad thing, but it also might just be that they're bad documents.
Yeah, if I may add to that, I think again, it's about keeping it at high level and making
Yeah.
sure that things like roles, responsibilities, and notification procedures are all inside that. Generally shows you have a policy and a plan. But when it comes down to testing, if you're being asked whether you're testing it or not, a lot of organizations don't want to put the resource time into testing these
Mhm.
things. But like you mentioned earlier about tabletop exercises,
Yeah.
that's actually a valid test. When people ask you, are you
Oh, they're
testing?
great. Yeah, they're really
Yeah,
good.
if at minimum you're doing even the read through, you're all reading through the plan. 5 of you around a table for an hour, talking about its validity, cross-examining it, possibilities, running through scenarios on a whiteboard. These are 5 scenarios that could happen that are in scope to our business.
Yeah.
And then walking through that plan, a walk-through test is another one. And then the third thing, again, which is a much more easier thing to do than actually shutting stuff down, right? It all works, is a simulated test. So you pick an environment, for example, a system, and you restore it.
Yeah.
Saying and you're able to document that you managed to, conduct recovery time objectives, achieve recovery time objectives
Yeah.
within a set time, right to the recovery point that you committed to. That again, this is all good narrative that you can share, and no one can say that you're not doing enough or you're not doing anything. Not doing
Yeah.
anything to say we haven't got a plan, we haven't got a policy, we haven't ever tested anything. We don't know.
A
That's
few
the
things, a few things on that as well, and I should disclose my bias. We do chaos engineering here, so we don't do like annual disaster recovery plans. Once every 2 weeks, we turn something off, and then we see how the systems react to that. And
Wow.
that could be a component level, it could be a server level, or it could be jumping from one region to another. Chaos engineering, a whole different ballgame than just disaster recovery testing. But it's worth looking into if the audience haven't come across it much. But one of the things that I like to do. It's not really an incident response testing thing. We do it more when we're kind of building an organization up to being able to do red teaming. Because the jump between a pen test where I go on site and I sit with the IT team and I do some tests up to a proper red team engagement where we're breaking into buildings and doing social engineering, it's quite a big jump. And as an organization, you don't need to make that in one step. You can build up slowly over time. And very often this is where people start talking about purple teaming and working with the SOC through the engagement and those kinds of things. But one of the things that I often do talking to an organization is if I gain access to a system, one of the things that I might do is slowly increase the noise on the network to see at what point the SOC respond. And that might be something that the organization wants to tune. So for example, I was doing a targeted breach recently, a couple of weeks ago, and I got credentials to log into a remote system. And I knew that I was a local administrator of that remote system. So that's effectively a full compromise of that one server. The way that I tested that was just to connect to the C dollar drive of the remote machine, because the C dollar drive is only accessible to administrators. So that's just a single login event to a network share. Network share's there by default. So there's nothing no hacking tools being run or anything like that. But that discloses to me as the pen tester that I have compromised that box. It's there waiting for me for when I'm ready. And then I wait to see, does the SOC respond to that? A user who doesn't usually interact with the system, logging in with high privileges, etc. And then we start doing things like, so the next step would be remote command execution. So can I execute a command over something like psexec or wmi, or maybe even just rdp onto the box, something like that, code execution onto the box. And then moving up from that to the step to doing obviously malicious activities, so doing things like dumping the SAM database and those kinds of things. And one of the things that I think often gets missed when we discuss things like testing is not only can, so say in the context of red teaming, not only can the SOC tell me what I did and what was successful, but can the SOC tell the story of what the attacker was up to? Very often I see things like I'll compromise 4 user accounts, and then I use one of them for an attack. The SOC notices that attack. Oh, this user account's just dumped the SAM registry, locks that account, and then I've got 3 other accounts to use. Because they don't follow through that story. And you can pull that out in a lot of different ways. You can pull it out through red teaming, pull it out through target breach assessments, or even as you say, just sitting down and walking through, this is your incident response plan. How would we respond to certain scenarios? And it's very likely that if an attacker has access to internal resources, they've probably not just got one account. They've probably not just got access to one machine. And being able to differentiate between things like network mapping and where access was actually gained and at what privilege level access was actually gained, it will massively impact how well the organization is able to respond to that. But yeah, I'll just summarize that as IR plans suck in my experience. I very rarely see good ones.
That is chaos engineering is interesting. I think I remember reading an article of yours once a few years back on chaos engineering, and at that time it totally bedazzled me. But you've connected with something really interesting just now,
Yeah.
and that is fault tolerance.
Yes.
get to really see how fault tolerant you are, and to
Yeah.
be able to tell the story for IR teams, to be able to tell the story of what happened,
Mm.
down to really good transparency of their architecture, knowing what's
Yeah.
where to be able to follow it, and not just having a bunch of tech products that
Yeah.
give them loads of big dashboards and loads of red lights, and they don't know what's
Yeah.
really going on.
There's a couple of things mentioned. Like chaos engineering is a huge topic. We could do a full hour on it, and it's important to look at some of the details, like reducing blast radius and all of those kinds of things. But don't just do chaos engineering because you've heard us talk about it. Research it first.
Yeah.
It can be high impact against organizations, but it's brilliant when you get to that level. But one of the things that chaos engineering brings us is we have, of course, like a internal service level agreement in terms of like how quickly should things happen. So when it looks at like our disaster recovery plan, for example, we have a metric which is how quickly should we be able to restore each server, right? So a web server blows up, how quickly should we be able to rebuild that? And that might be, depending on your organization, might be something like, oh, we can rebuild a web server within an hour. Because we have this fault tolerant system, a self-healing system where it we use things like, for the nerds out there, AWS auto scaling groups, so web servers can rebuild themselves and those kinds of things. That gives us an additional metric, which is really, really useful. And it is, how quickly does it usually happen? So because we're testing these not once a year, but once a fortnight, that's the cadence that we use. Once every 2 weeks, we break something. I know how quickly it usually takes a web server to restore itself. And it's not an hour. For us, it's usually about 3 minutes. And the reason that that metric's so useful is, if it's been more than 3 minutes for that web server to restore itself, something else is broken. So I get a massive heads up on, that's going slower than usual because we have a metric for what is usual, and that allows us to more quickly respond to there being some other incidents. We had a silly one recently. The web server hard disk got full. We were playing around with some machine learning stuff, and anyone who knows machine learning knows it's a resource intensive. And we filled one of the disks, and it failed in an unexpected way. But we picked up on that very, very quickly because we have those metrics, not only of contractually or from an SLA point of view, how quick should this take, but how long does it usually take?
Wow. Yeah. Oh, we have a question, Ben. If I may take the first, and it's actually,
Yeah, go ahead.
Your question, Ben, brings a smile to my face because a couple of weeks ago, I saw something quite incredible. And I saw an AI policy being written up by querying ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Oh, now you say, what's worse, a bad document or no document? Well, okay. I'd rather you'd write a document and have a set of documents, but time, priority, all that stuff is there. So my view is that this is really incredible. I've seen a ChatGPT write out a document, an AI policy that's absolutely, completely fine. You could actually publish with a little bit of intervention and tweaking. That, use tools, get some. There were people in the past selling policies for a business, but a lot of that's about to change. Which brings us down to adapting careers. Did you want to add anything to that question from Ben before we jump into this?
Yeah. So bad document or no document, it entirely depends. Generally, if I had to pick one, a bad document is probably better than no document, but there is exceptions to that. When we're thinking about things like password policies versus things like incident response policies, it's going to be very, very different, because you as an organization, for example, might not have a password policy, but you might have technical enforcement as to what passwords must be. So you might have configured Active Directory to say minimum password length, complexity enabled, all of those things. So in actuality, you do have a policy, you just haven't written it down. That's a different circumstance to just like, we haven't considered this. And of course, something like an incident response plan or incident response policy in terms of like how you triage incidents, you can have a really bad time if you don't have one of those. But it's like, simple example, yeah. If I'm doing a pen test and I want to understand the scale and complexity of a network, I might ask an organization, hey, can you send me over a network diagram? And what I'm looking for is things like, do you have segmentation or micro segmentation? Do you have anything that might slow me down on this pen test, which might take more time? And also an organization might not want me to waste time doing things like port scanning and network mapping and things like that, because they're time consuming. They just might want me to optimize for find as many vulnerabilities as quickly as possible. That's a fine thing, in my opinion, to do. So they might share with me a network diagram. And very often those organizations will say, oh, its network diagram's outdated, it's 12 months old, or oh, we don't really keep it up to date. Keeping network diagrams up to date is hard. And in that context, it doesn't really matter. I'm just looking for some rough directions in terms of how have you broken down the network, servers are over here, workstations are over here, what have you, or if you have segmentation, how have you implemented that? So a bad document is far better in that context than no document. But the flip side would occur if you have a document that is inaccurate and it is maybe saying that the organization should have protections that it doesn't. And where that can be a problem is where an organization is relying on that policy document and saying things like, look, this policy says users must pick passwords that are a minimum of 14 characters. But if you have no actual technical enforcement, nobody might be doing that. So you might get a false sense of security there. Or it might be the case that you have an incident response plan that is so outdated, maybe you're getting down to the granular detail of things like the system criticality, and your team is responding to an incident and they're trying to bring up the critical systems first. And if that document's woefully out of date or just inaccurate for whatever reason, they might be wasting time during a period of duress because the documentation is bad. And in actuality, having no document might have saved them that time working out this thing's completely useless. We'll go and do it manually and we'll have to work this out as we go along. So it could go either way, but I think one of the things, if you are very, very time limited and you're like, look, I just don't have the time to put together all of these documents, what's the minimum that I can do? One of the things that I would say is just document all of the decisions that you make. So this could be as simple as, for example, the NCSC no longer recommends that organizations enforce password complexity. There's a whole argument called Upgrading Your Approach in the NCSC's website about that. And if you follow that methodology and you decide that you're not going to enforce complexity for those reasons or similar reasons, just write that down. This organization is not technically enforcing complexity for these reasons. Every technical decision that you make or organizational decision, if you write those down, that can be very useful. You might not have a full policy suite, but what it'll allow you to do is revisit those decisions. So if I give you a really stupid example, an organization I was working with recently had a password policy that you could not use an emoji in your passwords. And the reason for that was at some point they had a system that if you used an emoji in your username or your password or anything like that, it crashed the system because it didn't have Unicode support. So they wrote that into the policy, mainly as an awareness thing. Don't do this because stuff breaks when you do. And when I got around to doing a kind of maturity review for this organization, looking through these policies, I asked them about this. I said, which system is it? Out of curiosity, you know, what have you got in current year argument? What have you got in 2023 that doesn't support emojis? And nobody knew. Because they hadn't documented that discussion and that justification and why it was. And the fact of the matter is that system has probably been decommissioned now. It probably isn't being used anymore. So that decision to not allow emojis in passwords, or I think what they actually did was block all symbols in passwords to prevent that as a quick way of solving that problem. And it wasn't necessary anymore. So yeah, if you're kind of due to time or resource limitations somewhere between bad document or no document, just document the decisions that you make and why you made them to allow you to revisit those decisions in the future.
That makes sense. Ultimately, these people who are asking are glad that you're there to respond, because every organization is going through continuous maturity level. Yeah. Right? We're never going to say we're completely perfect, otherwise there's no continuous improvement. So you're there, you're taking them from either startup to scale up to enterprise ready, or you're an enterprise and you've come in to clean up a mess, whatever the reason is, you know, taking them on a journey, and they're glad you're there to respond.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of examples you could think about that. Like Project Scope Creep's a great one where, you know, a company maybe does a review of a SaaS platform or something like that, decide that it's low risk because they're only going to use it for some simple task, and then they start using it for more and more and more things, and that maybe that the risk management they did for that system is no longer accurate. Great, if they'd wrote down all of those decisions that they made, they then know that that's due a review. So yeah, write down your decisions in the very least. Sawan, though, we've been going for an hour. You did want to mention some stuff around careers. Is there anything in particular you wanted to jump out? Should we revisit the job title thing?
Yeah, to a degree. Let's go into this career thing now. I mean, do you still think that there's that narrative that goes around lack of talent? You know, the talent gap. You know, I think it's still relevant, but it's also not relevant. Let's just say yes and no, and there is a reason why. Okay, talent is a skill. Relevant skills that people want, and it takes the right mind and the eyes to know what that is, and you're looking for that in a role. Right? But in terms of the job gap, so the job gap thing is a different question, but it's often. Now I feel that is what's not there. Our economy is going through change right now, as always. New changes that there is a lot of budget cuts. There isn't that many jobs out there. I don't think so, and I'm finding that that of course will change. It'll evolve. And there's a lot of merging of roles at the moment. A lot of merging of roles, like do more with less, a bit of Six Sigma culture here. And I think that with that, it's important to stay relevant in the room, to continue to show value. And to do that means we, of course, have to keep adapting to changing times. So when it comes down to whether it's frameworks you need to know, and that's your area of expertise, align that to business need, business value, continuously look for ways to do that. If it's technology, know what matters today. You know, if it's APIs, securing APIs, dealing with SaaS, no code platforms, securing those, all of that stuff, it's all still relevant, it's different, it's changing, and you've got to just focus on knowing what's most valuable to your company now and to your company in 2 years' time, or to who you want to work for next, and stay relevant in the room. And there's one last image I'll give you of that. You may be a perfect example. You're getting a lot of badges, lots of badges, you've got lots of experience, and you're in a good prime point in your career, and you think, yeah, this is great. This is really fantastic. I've enjoyed this. But you're standing in an elevator, and the elevator is getting full because lots of people are getting repurposed. Everybody's seen and read all the news about how cybersecurity and privacy is really valuable and a great place to go.
Yeah.
So they're all jumping in. They're either been made redundant from other companies and they're coming in, but they're either reskilling. They're brand new people learning new careers, joining the industry. And then there's repurposed people, right? People think, you know what? I've come from transformation. I've come from software development. I'll just read one book and bang, I'm in the industry. I'll be doing that too. Your lift is getting crowded. Getting crowded. How do you still shine?
Okay, cool.
Sorry, one last thing with that. To be that shiny pebble, you've got to stay relevant in the room. And it comes down to knowledge of relevance all the time. And that's what you do, stand in the middle and shine out. All yours.
Right. So there's a few different things to pull out there. The first is when people ask about like the skills gap or the hiring gap and those kinds of things, I very rarely find that multiple people will agree on what they mean by the skills gap. I do think there are problems with the industry regarding hiring, but actually getting it to pin down like what is the problem is very, very difficult. And often when people focus on initiatives to improve things, there's only so much one group or one person can do. So somebody might say, for example, there's not enough diversity in the industry, so I will focus on trying to bring women into the industry, and there's nobody focusing on trying to keep women in the industry, and maybe they'll do a couple of years and then leave. So there's all of those kinds of problems that muddy this circumstance. And then you also see things like people saying universities aren't preparing people for jobs in the industry. So I see this in pen testing where, for example, somebody will do a degree in ethical hacking or network security or something like that. Maybe they'll learn a lot about infrastructure security and they'll learn nothing about web application security. And we do both and more. So they don't have the skills that we need. But the counterpoint with that would be, well, you just need to set your company up for training then. If somebody's coming in with some of the skills, but not all of the skills that should be handled on the industry side of things. And then you also have problems around things like how do you hire people? What I mean by this is we have a SaaS platform and 95% of it is written in Python and about 5% of it is written in Rust. There's very good technical reasons for that. I'm very happy as an organization where we made that decision. But it means that when we're hiring people, we want somebody who's really good at Python and not bad at Rust so they can manage this code base. This Rust side doesn't change very often, but it's there and it's important. But if we put out a job description for we're hiring for a Python engineer versus an experienced Python engineer with some Rust, or however we want to word that, for the latter, just for mentioning Rust, we get significantly fewer applications. And it wouldn't surprise me if we looked into that, we'd actually get less diverse applications as well, because there's some people worry more if they don't tick all of the boxes versus if they only tick some of them. There's a diversity consideration there as well. But that is the thing where it's like, actually, when it comes down to it, when we're hiring people, we'll just go, well, I'll tell you what, we'll just advertise for the Python position. And when we get them in for the interview, we'll say, we've got a little bit of Rust as well. Well, how do you feel about that? And then, of course, you have all the kinds of answers from, oh, actually, I've done a little bit of Rust. Or, oh, actually, I did a module in my degree of it. Or, don't worry, I'm confident I can learn that because I'm a good software engineer and all those kinds of things. And it's never quite as big a problem as it is. But do I think there's a skills gap within cyber? Yes, my view of that, though, is possibly a little bit different. I work with a stupid number of organizations doing pen testing, and it's not uncommon for me to come across companies who have like revenue in the billions and their security teams like 2.5 people. So there must be a gap somewhere, because that doesn't make sense to me that I work for all of these huge companies and they've just got tiny security teams. Or you work for scale ups who have maybe made that jump from 50 employees to 100 employees and they're getting big and everything's getting pressurized. And you're like, got 100 employees and nobody has got the word security in their job title. So do see gaps like that. I don't know if that's a hiring gap in terms of these companies haven't considered that Python Rust problem that I mentioned, and they've just got maybe bias in their recruitment processes. Maybe those companies don't have a great training program, and that's what the problem is. Maybe those companies are only considering bringing people in and are not considering retention and all those kinds of things. Every company that I look for, and every time I look at this, I find problems like this. But yeah, there must be a gap somewhere, because my gosh, a security team's smaller than I, in my opinion, think they should be.
Yeah, there's that thing.
One more thing on that, if I can, though.
Sure.
Another thing I often hear in those discussions is, do you need a degree to work in security, or do you need a degree to work in software engineering? And I think it's a trick question. Before I answer that, though, I will disclose that I do have a degree. I have a master's degree in information security. The main reason that I got that degree, I don't actually think a degree is a requirement, because I've met many, many people who don't have a degree, and they'll say, well, when I get the interview, I'll just explain to them that I've got industrial experience and I've got X number of years working in industry and that kind of thing. And that's great. And that makes sense to me. So that implies to me that the answer is no, you don't need a degree, because I see people without degrees working in the industry. But a very slightly different question is it an advantage to have a degree? And I do think it's an advantage to have a degree, because that conversation where they're explaining their experience and how it's equivalent to a degree and X experience and X technology, I don't have to do that, because I just tick the box that says I've got a degree.
Yeah.
So do you need a degree to work in the industry? No. It's still good to have one, though. And it's the same with any certification. Okay, it would be a big thing for somebody who's been working in the industry for a while to go back and get a degree. I actually had 6 years industrial experience before I did my master's. So I worked in industry and then went back and got a degree. But it's the same with certifications and things. Like, do you need to be certified? Absolutely not. But if you can become certified, especially if you can get your company to pay for it or get some other kind of discount, sometimes vendors give vouchers and things like that. Yeah, grab degrees, grab certifications. I've got loads of them, not because I collect them, but because I do feel like they give me an advantage, even if I don't need them.
Yeah, ultimately they do, right? That's the same as vendor risk management. We talk about making the process simple. So you tick a box, say, yes, I have a degree, I have the CISSP, I have, whatever it's going to be that they're asking. You skip, you're in the next pool of evaluation. Absolutely, it's beneficial. If it's business beneficial and you can identify what it is, then you absolutely should make sense to do it and to find time to do it. And if you don't find so, and it comes down to degrees, it shows a longer term quality of training and investment into one's time, into learning. So it's obviously very beneficial to learn and to learn that way. And the experience is, that's why it's still asked a lot right now. It's still asked a lot. So continuous learning, ultimately, right?
Yeah.
And push your companies to do stuff. I think I've put 2 people in my career onto the apprenticeship levy to go and do a degree in cybersecurity. And I'm really proud of that story, and I talk about it a lot. Because they wanted to do it, and I went and approached L&D departments and said, can we tap into the apprenticeship levy? There's in one case, we don't really know anything about that. I lobbied the conversations, got it all started. And once you go through the admin, it's done. And the guy, the candidate is going and studying a couple of days a week in no time and doing well. But it's a bit of a thing, right? You sometimes have to go and make those networking conversations and make it happen and do it. It's the same like if you as an individual, any of us go and decide we want to study something new, we have to make the first move. We have to drive it. So the guy showed interest to me, and I clearly thought, okay, I'll go and make that happen. He works really hard, and I went and did it for him. And it was one of my team members. So
yeah, there's different ways as well of like achieving that stuff. So two of my team, for example, are doing their AWS Cloud Security Practitioner soon. And as part of going through that, managed to get a 50% voucher from AWS. It turned out what they wanted was you attend one of their events, specifically it was AWS Awesome Day. They attend that, they get a voucher. Great, that's awesome. But also it's a thing that I think as people move through their career, it's something that they should be asking during those interviewing processes. When you get to the end and they say, have you got any questions for us? You say, yeah, do you have a training budget? Do you pay for certifications? Do you pay for conferences? What have you? The company might say no. The company might not have even considered it. But I've worked for several companies that have a budget specifically for training, and they should be able to talk to you about what that policy and process is for getting that. And if you're lucky enough to get 2 job offers for 2 different competing companies, and you're looking at, oh, which one should I go for? What's the positive and negative of each position? Having a training budget might be a great thing for you. In particular, even as you become more senior, because some of the certifications are ridiculous. I'm CREST CCT, I'm a CREST web application specialist. I have to do that certification every 3 years. The total cost for doing that certification is something like £3,000. It's a huge amount of money because, of course, so there's a written element and there's a practical element. And then, of course, for the practical, you've got to consider travel and hotels and all of that thing, because you've got to go to Slough or Milton Keynes or somewhere like that. So they're very costly. And maybe you're at a point in your career where you're happily senior and you're not worrying about it, and maybe certifications aren't the thing for you, but attending conferences and things like that might be something that benefits you for the networking or the learning or what have you. And some organizations have, hey, you can spend it on certs, or you can spend it on conferences or what have you, or online training resources, those kinds of things. So as Ben says in the chat, you don't ask, you don't get. And I don't think enough people ask during that interview process, hey, what does this company offer in terms of my own development? And training budgets are awesome, and everyone should have one.
Yeah, definitely. That's it's part of that conversation about getting their commitment and buying into you, making a decision to join them in the first place.
Yes,
really important. Yeah. And then make time to go to those events and get those continuous development points, because thankfully some of the certifications, some of mine are renewable by participation.
Yes,
for visiting the exams, and it's a good thing when that is a common evolution in a lot of these certification bodies nowadays, but it's a good thing that it's there.
And if you go to events, then you can see me speaking, because I'm speaking at B-Sides Lancashire on Thursday, and I have an entire bag. You can't see it because my camera's blurry, but this is an entire bag of foxes. I don't know if I can convince my camera to show one of them, but this is how I'm speaking at B-Sides Lancashire, and I just inexplicably posted a bag of foxes to social media, and I was just like, people messaging when they're trying to work out, why do you have like 50 foxes? So if you happen to see on LinkedIn, I think it was yesterday, or Twitter yesterday, wondered why I had so many foxes. There's giveaways for B-Sides, so anyone who's attending B-Sides can grab one. And I know, Sawan, you're not going to B-Sides Lancashire this time around, so I'll have to see you at another event, and I'll get you a Akimbo branded fox plushie, don't worry.
Thank you. And by the way, anyone who hasn't seen Holly speak really must. It's really insightful. The story she tells, it's incredible.
Should we take this last question before we close out? We've been a little bit over the hour.
Yes, you go first.
So the question is, guys, we talked about the issues, but what motivates you for tomorrow? What are you looking forward to now at this point in your career? One of the things that I'm really motivated with at the moment is offensive uses of machine learning. I don't talk about it too much. I think anyone who sees a lot of the talks that I do might counter that. But I think at the moment, everybody's talking about things like ChatGPT in terms of software developers using it for, possibly being lazy at the job and having AI write code for them instead of working, and talking about it in terms of like a productivity tool and those kinds of things. I think that's great, and I definitely think AI in those contexts opens up a whole bunch of stuff that we didn't have before. But also, I think on the offensive side of things, we're not seeing a lot of people talk about it, and I think it gives great advantages to pen testers and those kinds of things. This is a part of my B-Sides Lancashire talk, but to mention, for example, we've been using machine learning during pen testing recently to rapidly increase how quickly we can find confidential data on networks. So if I compromise some, finance at companyname.com, those kinds of things, and I've got a whole network that might somewhere have finance information or PII on that network, manually scanning that would take a huge amount of time. And of course, when I'm doing red teaming and things like that, the more time I spend as an attacker in the network prodding systems, the more likely the SOC is to detect me and react to that. But if I can leverage machine learning to make those attacks faster, I can find that data and exfiltrate that data faster, and make it a lot harder for SOC teams and those kinds of things. So one of the things that motivates me is how machine learning is going to change the offensive side of security, because I don't think there's a huge number of people talking about that. The only time anybody ever talks about AI and ML in the context of pen testing is people saying, am I worried that my job's not going to exist soon because they're going to automate pen tests away? I don't think that's going to be the case, but I do think offensive uses of AI and ML are going to be shown to be very, very effective over the coming years, in particular for rattling through networks and finding confidential data in places that it shouldn't be. So that's what motivates me at the moment. That's a personal interest thing. But I mean, I've been in the industry for 16 years now. There's always something going on. There's always something new. There's always some new technology to play with. So I'm just as kind of ambitious and confident that there's new and interesting things coming now as I was when I first started. What about you, Sawan?
Yeah, I love that. Definitely. You know, it's not a bubble, is it? It's not a bubble that was ever going to burst. People wondered, is it going to the industry? But as it rose to prominence, but it's evolving, and that's the thing about staying relevant. So for me, what motivates me is to continue to be relevant by using the power of knowledge and learning what's relevant for all, to be able to share that in meaningful ways that help people also benefit and build good brand value for themselves in their organizations and succeed. And I do believe that, and Holly's ahead of me with this one, I believe that after you've been doing and delivering information security improvement in whatever form for a few years, for a number of years, for many years, eventually you have to start creating information security. So there's one thing when they say creating, it means innovating and building products into the market. And rather than going in and bringing out and building programs and succeeding with programs with all these other big vendors you hear about, you've got to build products and get involved with that. And with ML, no-code platforms, reusable building blocks, API connectivity, there's a lot of possibility for the people who are not the seasoned developer to build something and bring it to market really quickly and get into the annual recurring revenue stream of the world. And I'm very interested in that at the moment. And you know, Holly's already got a product, so that's fantastic. And
Yeah.
our collaborations lead to lots of inspiration for me to bring that and make that a reality. So that's what's inspiring me at the moment for the future.